Thymesia, a single-player action RPG developed by indie developers Overborder Studios by way of Team 17. With its full release now upon us, inviting players into its dark and mysterious world to test their mettle on its self-described grueling difficulty, making for a truly harrowing experience. Although I'm not sure all the NPCs got the memo. Today we take a spoiler-free deep dive into the long-anticipated Thymesia, an unmissable Souls-like. Right off the top, this video will cover a whole range of Thymesia's features, but for those looking to enjoy the story, worry not, as nothing plot-wise outside of the intro and tutorial mission will be discussed. Thymesia tells the tale of Corvus, and as the intro details, is a citizen of the now disease-ridden kingdom of Hermes, who have spent the past decades toying with alchemy to try and rid the lands of the deadly plagues now ravaging it, with some success, but their efforts have had nasty consequences of turning some of its inhabitants into hulking beasts, and it's up to Corvus to find out what's happened. Working through the tutorial mission, what is immediately clear is the scale of the influence of the Soulsborne titles. Dodging and deflecting attacks are a must, even right out the gate with Thymesia, and as with games such as Sekiro, requires timing of attacks and parries to come out on top. Okay, I may have mistimed that one slightly. That large knight, George Formaning Old Corvus here, is what begins the game's core plotline. That of Corvus losing his memory and needing to retrace his steps through a number of areas around the land, to uncover his past and play out his story. A tad on the cliché side, but does well at least to give some pace, taking the player from action-packed instance to another. Once in the game proper, it is clear that Overborder have leaned pretty far into its highly Soulsborne-inspired mechanics. Memories obtained from defeating foes used to level up are dropped on death, and can also be boosted using collectibles found out in the environments. Enemies will respawn upon using one of the game's beacons in place of Dark Souls bonfires, and Overborder even include the little bastard enemies that wait patiently and sucker punch you from around a corner out of sight.
Oh, well, hello. Do you greet everyone like that, you fucking bastard?
But not all systems are derived from FromSoft's offerings. There are also some features that add some unique spice to the formula. Thymesia uses a dual health bar system for the enemies within the game. A standard health bar alongside the wounds bar, with the latter being susceptible to Corvus's claw abilities, meaning that simply spamming attacks will not bring enemies down easily, and players will need to choose their attacks well to deplete both when taking down foes. While also making boss fights all the more distressing, seeing them heal back a big chunk of health during showdowns. The game also features the Reeve system, which allows players to extract abilities from enemies aligned with the weapon the enemy is wielding, which adds some nice variety as well as some on-the-fly strategizing, absorbing a weapon from an enemy to use the associated skill for a particular build or encounter. Permanent assignable weapon skills known as plague weapons can also be unlocked after collecting items dropped from their associated enemies. The permanent versions can be upgraded, unlocking further attributes for more customization. Health items can also be upgraded, and brewed with ingredients to grant further boosts, adding yet again to the game's opportunities to strategize.
Thanks for waiting.
These features, alongside the game's leveling and associated skills, grant for a fair amount of tweaking towards a particular playstyle, along with keeping the moment-to-moment gameplay varied during the game's roughly 10 hours of runtime, as well as when mixed with the game's finishes, adding to what I like to call the sit the fuck down feeling of satisfyingly smashing a foe down after a tense showdown.
How you doing, Mr. Nice Plan? Get your fucking ass in there.
A Souls-like wouldn't be complete without a roster of bosses to slowly go insane while taking on. And Thymesia does deliver, at least with a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to its bosses. A number of face-offs felt great, as someone who's played through nearly all of FromSoft's offerings. Tough encounters with sometimes multiple phases, getting absolutely battered the first couple of attempts, then gradually learning the attack patterns and ways to counter to begin to turn the tables. Kitting out my builds with anything to give me an edge, all culminating in that oh-so-satisfying victory. Download complete. Some boss fights felt truly akin to everything I love about grinding out tough boss encounters in RPGs, and Overborder absolutely nailed it for me with some of the encounters in Thymesia, but it's a bit of a shame that both the difficulty and enjoyability is sometimes a tad inconsistent. Some later face-offs are laughable in terms of challenge further into the game, as well as some mechanically being so simplistic, it makes the fights that get it right feel like they're almost part of a different game entirely. For fans of the FromSoft school of boss battles, you'll get that fix with Thymesia, but don't expect the scaling to be so on the nose throughout with your time with this one. And you too can arm yourself against tentacle-flailing Marauders of the Night by dropping a like on the video and letting me know your thoughts down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for all sorts of RPG greatness, as it really helps to keep the content coming. As any fan of ARPGs will testament to, it's not just the boss encounters that'll take your head off. Thymesia's environments are littered with both standard enemies as well as far tougher mini-bosses of sorts to tussle with while exploring its world. And these enemies are not messing around at all. One of the things I notice most about fighting through the game's enemies is just how little of a fuck they actually give. And by that I mean you can throw an entire special attack at them, and not only will they not care, but actually turn around and smash you in the face during it. With such insane poise, the crutch of simply stun-locking your enemy into submission gets thrown out of the window, especially when coupled with the game's counter-attack system that will see enemies strike back automatically after taking too much of a battering. This is where Thymesia nails that Souls-like feeling of grinding away through its environments, keeping players on their toes, knowing that around any corner could be an adversary waiting patiently for their first opportunity to smash you and your collected memories to bits like happy hour at an absinthe bar. The pacing of the game is done well, with larger, more formidable foes being spread across the landscape to keep the challenges coming, and frequently featuring alongside a few less powerful enemies to throw target prioritization into the mix, which can be a struggle with 3 or more attackers, especially in the game's second set of missions, which include continuously spawning arm-flailing lava bastards, which for me at least being more frustrating, continuously getting in the way than presenting an interesting challenge.
Mummy, I'm a lava nonsense.
When it comes to the game's levels, they're split into 3 major chapters and a final fight, and 3 to 5 side quest instances following completion of the main objective and accompanying boss fight. The side quest levels vary from slightly reskinned and shuffled around versions of the main level to completely new areas, and even massive optional boss encounters. With so much featured in the game's side quest levels, I'm not really sure why Overboarder decided to make these optional, as anyone that felt like they didn't fancy it would miss half of the game's sometimes best content completely, and would likely be sat reading the credits after only a few hours feeling slightly out of pocket. The areas in the game are well designed and do well to sell the dark and depressing atmosphere of the narrative, while lacking the grand scale of games such as Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring. Very linear and to the point, but including shortcuts unlocked as you progress that most FromSoft fans will be familiar with, alongside the disturbing child NPC pushing along the game's plotline.
Oh, sorry, am I putting you out? Please resume your incredibly interesting activity of staring at the wall.
She being only one of a couple of actual friendly NPCs to encounter, as most of the game's narrative and world building is done via the various notes and books found during the player's adventure. The story is as subtle to uncover as the game's inspiration, and wouldn't be something I'd advise buying the game solely to experience, but does enough to frame the time spent exploring the game's world.
Haha, who's creeping up on who now, you little punk?
Thymesia, as you may have picked up on already, isn't exactly the longest ARPG, coming in at around 10 or so hours to run through each level including side quests and bosses, but it does have the price tag to match, being around $25 as opposed to the usual $40 or $50. But what stood out most for me around the duration is what it reminded me about the game as a whole. I didn't want it to end so soon, as I was having such a blast working my way through its levels. Yes, the game is a bit rough around the edges, lacks the depth and character creation of titles such as Nioh 2, and as far as the bigger encounters go is a little hit and miss, but when Thymesia hits, it hits hard, and right on the bullseye of what makes the games it draws inspiration from such an incredibly enjoyable experience. The lack of armor and weapons to swap out at first feels like a downgrade, but what I realized as I progressed is it forces the player to get—
Don't say it!
Say what?
You know. Don't say it.
Right. It forces the player to dial in and overcome the game's harder challenges with skill rather than relying on powerful items to do some of the heavy lifting. The game does lack replayability with no New Game Plus, and in my run at least I was able to unlock all the plague weapons and fully dick out old Corvus here, and the multiple endings can be seen by anyone who's sharp enough to just stick down a save file before decisions are made at the game's finale. But Thymesia for me is finally a Souls-like RPG that captures a lot of what makes the FromSoft titles so special. Brutal difficulty coupled with addicting moment-to-moment combat, a highly mysterious world filled with legions of formidable opponents, not knowing what the game will throw at you next, or if you'll make it to that next safe haven. At a reduced asking price mostly due to its duration, the game is a must-play for any fans of challenging ARPGs. Watered down from some of its competition, yes, but I'd rather spend time playing a title that gets the core experience so spot on any day over one overladen with additional features that doesn't feel exciting to play through. If you're looking for a quick injection of Sekiro-style ARPG action to sharpen your reflexes, or a quick-fire round of tough boss encounters without the advanced systems of games such as the Nioh series, then it is here with Thymesia. A shot glass filled to the brim with controller-crushing action, ready to slam straight down your get-gut.
Ah! He almost said it.
And after a debut into the genre like this, especially for an indie title, I will be keeping a close eye on what developers Overboarded Studios look to pull out of the hat next. Thank you so much for watching. This one was a little delayed due to having to move house, which is a ball ache at the best of times. Doing that while covering such a challenging and at sometimes frustratingly difficult game was quite the combination, and I think a controller of mine is still in orbit somewhere. I want to give a massive shout out to the channel members for supporting the channel and helping to keep the content coming. If you're interested in becoming a channel member for all sorts of perks including exclusive videos, the info is down in the description. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an upload, which will be back to a more typical schedule, and quite possibly the return of a certain pint-sized disco enthusiast. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Jesus, calm down! Oh dear Lord, what have I done?